And in that period, about 32% were saying that they feel stressed. But what has always surprised me year on year is this consistent theme of Kenyans being resilient, where they're saying, even if today things are not working, how can I plan for the future? So this is where the whole business thing comes in.
Or like Gen Zs, as Gen Zs might say, if it's giving, then you, then you just, you basically just drop it and make your side hustle your full-time hustle and, forget about, double dealing in a way.
Of course, when it comes to capital, at Tala, about 70% of our lending goes to micro and small businesses.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Make Money, the podcast. And today, we're about to talk about entrepreneurship. And our conversation today is based off Tala's Money Match report for 2025. And the findings there the key takeaway for me has been Kenyans turning more into small businesses as their primary source of income amidst what has been a shrink in the foremost jobs market. And, a reduced participation in, combining full-time jobs and side hustles. And to have this conversation, I'm happy to be joined by the general manager at Tala, Stella Mombi. Stella Mombi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kafa.
Yeah, thanks. And before we even dive deeper into what was the key takeaway for me from this report, I think first if you'd give us an overview of the survey, the demographic, and the purpose of this survey would really be appreciated.
For sure. Yeah. So just starting with an introduction for Tala as well. For those listeners who might not know Tala.
Yeah.
So Tala is a fintech company serving about 10 million customers across 3 continents. So we have operations in Kenya, Philippines, Mexico, and India. And we've been very focused on democratizing access to financial services, and especially for underbanked populations. So we call them the global majority because this is the majority of the world.
Yeah.
So we started with credit, and that's been our core. That's what we are mostly known for. Disbursed a little over $5 billion over the last 10 years of existence. And now we're really thinking about additional services, even beyond credit. How do we continue to support consumers even more? And how Money Match actually came to be, just thinking about that 10-year story. At year 5, we saw a huge, shift in the industry. So 300 plus digital lenders in the Play Store just in Kenya. And customers who are starting to have a lot of challenges around over-indebtedness or issues around fair collections practices. And for us, when we think about our responsibility as one of the largest players in the market, we thought about Money Match, which has run for the last 5 years. And the focus is always 2 parts. So one is how can we increase the amount of information about customers and about the industry, which is what the report does, and it's publicly accessible. So we're able to actually share information on what is the primary income for most customers, how they're feeling about the operating environment or macro environment in the country, how are they planning and thinking about the future, what are financial services are serving them. I think that's good information for us as an industry and also for different players.
Yeah.
And then the second half of it becomes financial literacy. As we move to digital finance, then the bigger question is how does digital literacy evolve as well? Yeah. So we run quite a lot of programs there, which I'm sure we'll be talking about, as part of this conversation.
Yeah.
But now to bring it home, about for the report itself, we've been surveying about 1,000 customers year on year. So this is a very representative group of individuals. So it cuts across people whose primary income is salaries or business or part-time if you have a gig, you're a gig worker. So just really trying to get a picture across different ages, different economic groups, across different employment types, because that gives us a more representative, sample of what's happening.
Yeah. So I think now moving to the report, for me there were 2 key takeaways. We are seeing Kenyans turning more into small businesses for a livelihood.
Yeah.
So what we are seeing is job opportunities shrinking, and at the same time, of course, to understand this, I think there's always a point made, confusing correlation and causation, where you think one is causing the other. So if we are to take that finding alone and break it down, is it a factor that there are no jobs, so people are moving into businesses, or jobs are there, but somehow businesses are still favored by the population? Or is it perhaps a combination of a little bit of both here?
I think it could be a combination of a bit of both, but the one I'm more confident around is actually this idea of I want financial freedom. Like we've been hearing this a lot from customers.
Yeah.
So just to share some numbers, and I'm just going to refer to my numbers so I don't get it
It's
wrong.
okay. It's okay.
So we saw primary income for businesses being people who are reporting that primary income, the primary income is coming from businesses, are about 26%. As an example, the year before, that was 19%.
Yeah.
But why I'm bringing this up is the year before that, this was 29%. So if you compare, for example, 2025 and 2023, it's
Yeah.
fewer people. It's actually fewer people than in 2023, or rather, if you compare 2025, it's fewer people than 2023.
Yeah.
But the numbers are fairly similar, still upwards of 20%.
Yeah.
So why I bring this up is we're starting to see Kenyans really thinking about, how can I get financial freedom? How can I actually not be dependent on a job? And the other metric that was really important, just to talk about data a bit, in the report we were seeing about 9 in 10 customers saying that their financial lives had gotten harder. So that's majority. So literally a very small percentage that is feeling comfortable. And in that period, about 32% were saying that they feel stressed. But what has always surprised me year on year is this consistent theme of Kenyans being resilient, where they're saying, even if today things are not working, how can I plan for the future? So this is where the whole business thing comes in. Because essentially, if you think about someone's day-to-day life, they're thinking, how do I essentially stop paying rent? And then the second thing is, how do I actually have money for my day-to-day expenses? I need to buy household things. I need to actually pay for school fees and so on and so forth. So that's where the idea of business comes in, because if you look at the two top pieces that customers were interested in, they're talking about home ownership and business. So for them, it's about, I need to make sure that my family is secure and we always have a home. And in addition to that, I want to have a business which allows me more freedom of time, more at least I'm more in control of my future. And I can essentially, just get that financial freedom back. And last thing I'll mention is, and I know we'll be talking about salaried individuals, but there's been a big gap today in terms of income versus expenses. Let me give you an example. I love speaking to customers. So I spend quite a bit of time. I'll just go walk in Gara. And if you talk to any business, they'll essentially tell you that life is hard. My expenses are higher than my income. So you find that even for individuals who are salaried, they're feeling the same heat. So if someone sees a path where they could be making a bit more for their families, then you find people actually making the shift. So in that instance, it becomes less about availability of opportunities, but it's more about financial freedom.
And I think on the same note, as we see the formal job opportunities shrinking, we also see side hustles taking a hit. And ideally, the way we've always seen side hustles is it becomes a side hustle if I'm doing it on top of a full-time job. So sometimes here correlation might be close to causation. But if you take the question around, why are we seeing also side hustles coming down? Is it a factor that the shift has generally been, basically you make your side hustle your main hustle and it's no longer a side hustle, and at the same time you're no longer at your full-time job? Is it the same thinking here?
I think it could be a mix of both, right? And just to throw around some numbers again, this year we only had 20% of salaried individuals reporting having a side hustle. Looking at 2023, that's 2 years ago, the number was 2x that. It was 40%. So you're completely right. Like there is a big gap. But another number I want to bring up that I think will shed a very clear picture is we had 57% of customers saying that they had no money left for any leisure or entertainment after expenses. So let's talk about how salaried people have side hustles. You find that in most instances, I have a job, I have some extra money, and instead of putting it in a static investment, I decide, let me start a business and get more money. But right now we're seeing salaried individuals having very little disposable income. So you find that even that money to start a side hustle is no longer a reality. And in addition to that, if for TAL as an example, what we've seen customers do, especially salaried customers, is take a loan to start a side hustle, and then they'll repay it once the salary comes. But if you're really tight on your income as exists, then you're unable to even effectively take credit that you can afford to pay to start the side hustle. So I think for me, it's more of a signal of the larger macroeconomic situation where paychecks are very tight right now. And as a result, we're just seeing less and less people having that disposable income, because a lot of people are almost living a bit hand to mouth at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the other question I might follow up on that around side hustles, it's always sometimes very difficult to run a side hustle when you're in full-time employment. When you're expected, your employer wants to see you 8 to 5 p.m. And, I know people who've tried to run farming enterprises on their phones, and they'll tell you how hard that hurt, because sometimes it's just difficult to coordinate. You're better on the ground doing the actual work.
Yeah.
Could it also be a factor of that sometimes you either have to drop that side hustle, or you have to decide between your job if your side hustle is showing that potential, or like Gen Zs might say, if it's giving, then you just you basically just drop it and make your side hustle your full-time hustle, and forget about double dealing in a way.
Yeah, I would say in part that is true, where like you find most people are almost using side hustles as like a test.
Yeah.
So instead of leaving a full-time job and not having that financial safety net, then can I test and see what business works? And if something picks up, then I will essentially make a more permanent move. So that is very true. But even if you talk about businesses on the other side, the example I was giving in Gara, probably in February when I was speaking to businesses, I was talking to this lady who sells bed sheets as an example. And what she was telling me is like, in a week I would finish my stock. Right now it's taking me 2 weeks. So also just putting it out that at the end of the day, who purchases from a business? It is mostly salaried individuals. So back to the point I was bringing up earlier, it's also a tougher time to have a business, because a lot of the people who had a lot of cash to spend no longer have it. So we showed a video at the launch, report launch, and actually what people were saying in that video was, hakuna pesa kwa economy. That's what it feels like for a lot of people. So even why I truly feel strongly that it has a lot to do with the macroeconomic situation is, even if people have that willingness, we know Kenyans are very entrepreneurial. There is that willingness. But right now, do I have the money to start the business? No. Number two, even if I start the business, is it a strong environment where I can actually sell my goods? Then we're not seeing businesses performing as well as they did in the past.
In terms, I think in terms of the shift towards entrepreneurship, I always seem to see two themes. There are people who, either, like you said, you test out with a side hustle your business idea, and if it works, you switch completely, or you make an actual steps to transition from a full-time job to running your own businesses. But we have this category of people who sometimes, life forces on you, you really have to start that business. Nothing is coming forth. You might have a few coins on the side, and you decide, actually, I'm just going to run on these, and, we'll figure it out as we go. In terms of the kind of support you're seeing for businesses in the country, what kind of support is there? I think the common one is always capital. I think, unfortunately, that's the only one, we look upon. How much can I get? Financiers bringing credit, giving credit to businesses and households and whatnot. That's usually the large thing. But in terms of a broader support, is there a supportive ecosystem for entrepreneurship? You did mention that Kenyans are quite entrepreneurial, but are we seeing there being support? Especially for this shift of people into entrepreneurship, are they finding any support, or are you on your own, basically?
I would say there is support that exists, but is it enough? Not by a mile. Like, I do think there's a big missed opportunity for MSMEs in emerging markets as a whole. This is not just a Kenya problem. If you go to Uganda, it's 1 million salaried individuals. It means essentially the entire ecosystem is running on MSMEs. So this is a big problem. And like, if you look at Kenya, we're talking about MSMEs being or employing upwards of 10 million individuals. And we're talking about 40% of the GDP coming from MSMEs. So this is massive. So if you think about even the types of interventions we've seen, I wouldn't say they're enough. So when I think about someone starting a business, whether it's micro, small, or medium, there's two things you need. We've already talked about capital. That's always the big one, right? At the end of the day, where's the money coming from for any capital expenses, for any operational expenses? But the second part for me, it's business know-how. Like, how well do you understand the market you're going in, the opportunity, the market trends, how to even run a business successfully and manage a business. And I do think the two have to go hand in hand and work together. And I truly believe that the best options that exist for entrepreneurs bring the two together.
Yeah.
Because it's more of teaching you how to fish and then giving you like the rod, essentially.
Yeah.
So you're fully empowered. So when I think about these two examples, I can give examples of what we do at Tala, what I've seen in the market.
Yeah.
Of course, when it comes to capital, at Tala, about 70% of our lending goes to micro and small businesses. And I do think to have a product that is successful for that type of a segment, it needs a lot of flexibility. So what I mean by flexibility is, if you're running a business and I give you 20,000 and I tell you must pay me back in 7 days, but it takes you 30 days to sell your goods, then that doesn't work. For example, if I give you a loan and I tell you must pay me X% interest, but your profit margins are lower than your interest, then I'm stifling the business. So I do think there's that level of customization that is needed in terms of how these products are structured. So can you actually select your due date? Is a credit actually affordable, and so on and so forth, and is the limit serving the size of amount that you need? So I do think there's a big opportunity there. And we've seen, of course, the likes, companies very similar to Tala. We've seen banks actually becoming a lot more nimble because then understanding that to serve an MSME, you need to have a more flexible product. Then on the coaching side, I do think that's a big opportunity that exists today. On the Tala side, what we have been doing, especially during this Money Match period and even throughout the year, we have a biashara community, because again, it needs to be a very specialized way of doing things. So we have a biashara community where different businesses can be part of, and we offer trainings. So we'll offer trainings through different partners. Sometimes it's a Centonomy or different other types of partners to support these small businesses. Then in addition to that, we have a learn center within our app where people can access information. But that said, I do think there's a lot more we could be doing, especially now with the advent of AI. How can you actually leverage these large language models to support businesses? Like where you can essentially take your Instagram shop, put it on an LLM, and it tells you this is what you could be doing better to drive sales in your business. And those are some of the things we're testing, because I do believe there's a big opportunity there in even empowering MSMEs a lot more, to just know how do I even become better in my business. Outside of that, I've seen a lot of banks who have specialized business business communities. And I would say, like, if you're thinking about starting a small business, if you're an entrepreneur, look out for these spaces where people are saying, hey, I'll come and give you the education and the tools and the know-how. And in addition to that, I can be able to also support you from a capital standpoint to truly empower you to go after your vision.
In terms of support from financiers, which is where generally you sit, that's where exactly would place you from the get-go. What has been lacking in structure in products that are more supportive of businesses, especially those on the startup level? And I know a lot of time you end up taking a facility that does not fit your business, and like you said, I can't come for a short-term loan due in a week, and I'm trying to go buy merchandise and sell it off. Most likely or not, especially on the first get-go, there's a lot of risk of that facility becoming impaired. From other surveys, we get to learn that a lot of the capital to start businesses is from mostly family and friends, before people ever think of the financiers and the banks and the like. What will it take to ensure that the ecosystem is there, that today we can walk into any financial institutions, either be it Tala, be it a conventional bank, and get a facility that's actually responsive to the needs that maybe my business requires more patient capital, so maybe I should obtain a facility, a bit of a grace period, or a bit of a stretched out facility, so I'm able to meet the payments. What will it take to have that ecosystem, so that it's not always that accusation of financiers are not, you guys are not supporting businesses, or you want someone with a complete, or you're only supporting mature businesses where I can produce my sales, I have data to back my sales, I can show you my revenues and whatnot. What will it take to ensure that even for someone making that transition, you're trying your hand at business for the very first time, that I can have the confidence to walk to yourselves or any other financial institution and actually get something that can work for me?
Yeah, for sure. And I would say I like how you've broken it down, because I do think there's two levels of a business, right?
Yeah.
There's what you're talking about where someone is starting a business, and then there's where someone has already started and they're looking for like more operational capital, or they're looking to scale. So I'll talk about them separately. And the overarching theme actually here will be data. Today, if you walk into a bank and you tell them, hey, I have a business and I'm looking to get a loan, they'll ask you for more information. They just need to prove, is the business real? How much do you do in sales? And part of that is actually principles of responsible lending, because when you're essentially giving credit, you have to make sure the person is not fraudulent. They have the ability to repay and willingness to repay. And the ability part is always a factor of how much do you have in sales per week. So, for example, if you have 50K in sales, giving you a 200K loan might not make sense, because there's no way you'll have the money to repay it. So those are the principles of responsible lending that as a lender you always have to think about. So with that said, I do think data becomes really key. And right now, let me give an example of you're starting a shop in your neighborhood, a general store.
Yeah.
Let's use that as an example. A lot of people who are coming to you are probably paying you in cash. So you find that in such instances, there is no digital trail of the transactions you're doing.
Yeah.
So how can you give that visibility to a lender so that they can see that, oh, I can give Kefa a loan. Kefa does X type of business. So for me, I think the big theme remains to be data, and how you solve for it is actually two-part. There is, of course, data. We're big believers that data belongs to you as a customer.
Yeah.
So how are you making that data available to your lender to support you in getting credit? And there are a lot of conversations as an industry we've been having around principles like open finance, where we think about, if your data is sitting in a bank, can you give permission to the bank to give that data to Tala, so Tala can give you a loan. Yeah. So I think that's the simplest way to explain it. But we don't have such frameworks that exist in Kenya. Yeah. And I do think that limits a lot of, marginalized groups. So whether it's MSMEs, women, youth looking to get loans, because their data is not visible. And then the second path, which is always really important in my mind, is we can also help you digitize that data. So we've seen a lot of fintech companies that have come out where they'll tell you, put your stock on this app, put your sales on this app. Yeah. This is you digitizing your data and digitizing your business, so that someone can essentially take that data. It can be given to a bank and they can essentially underwrite you, or can be given to Tala and they can essentially underwrite you. And the next layer, I think, will be AI. Some very interesting things we're testing as Tala in the market right now, where we can, underwrite you based on, a picture of your business as an example. So at the end of the day, I do think all in all, the biggest gap is always data, because in lending, you don't know each other. The financial institution doesn't know you, you don't know them. So how do you bridge that gap to get to know each other? And that's by giving information on what your business is. Yeah. And I would say when you're starting out, that's also okay. It's about sharing your vision and showing proof of like how you'll actually be able to repay the loan down the line. I think it's always just about building that relationship and building that confidence. And what I always encourage small businesses to do is find a financial partner that works for you, that can actually walk the journey with you. Because things might go wrong. If things go wrong, you want the right partner by your side. And if things go really well, you want the right partner to continue helping you grow.
I think to sum it up is still on the financing side, and I think now we might return to the macros and the situation we have right now. Towards the end of last year, because of the effect we saw of quite high interest rates, high impairments, we have both from the digital lenders and the banking side. We did see quite the shrink in lending from commercial banks, and I know they've given various reasons for this. Of course, the high rates, some of them were exchange rate matters, where if you do lend in foreign currency, of course, with the shilling gaining, that would be a lesser value expressed in Kenya shillings terms. For someone wondering, financiers are there standing and saying they are ready to help us with the capital, the resources we do need for our businesses. But we've seen a macro environment that has really been still for lending activities. What will it take to turn the taps on in 2025 so that, again, we are not we are telling a very different story come December 2025 from December 2024.
Yeah, I do think, number one, what actually affected the banks, I always like to clarify, what affected the banks actually, interestingly, did not affect like the likes of Tala or digital credit providers.
Yeah.
In terms of like the rate that the customer gets.
Yeah.
Well, we saw people who had bank loans seeing their rates go up. Any Tala loan you had, the price has always remained the same. It's 0.3 to 0.6% per day. So I do think also, that's also a big factor for any small business, and especially micro and small businesses, which are most susceptible to shocks, to always think about, okay, where can I get credit that serves my purpose? And where probably the cost of the credit is slightly more manageable for me. So I would say that is a big one. In terms of thinking about just like which lender you actually choose, which I think is the most important part. But as you were talking about pricing, and I mentioned this earlier, I do think one of the bigger shifts to make sure like pricing actually works is thinking about the business itself. I am always very big on designing products that make sense for the customer. So to give an example, if someone is selling more FMCG goods, as an example, their margins tend to be 2-3%. It's under 10%. But someone who has a grocery store, whether it's a fancy one in the fancy areas of Nairobi or not, they will buy something at 10 shillings, sell it at 20 or 30 shillings. That's upwards of 100%. So thinking about the product that you structure for this person and this person A and person B, they have to be fundamentally different. And I do think there's some of the ways that even as businesses you lower the risk and increase access, because access is always blocked by the idea of defaults. Like if you see if a sector is perceived as risky, then it means it's not profitable to serve that sector. But I don't believe that the issue here is the sector being risky. I think the issue has always been, what is the quality of the product that is being given to the customer? Does it serve their needs? Does it match how their businesses actually operate? So I think that is actually how we close a gap. And in addition to that, I know we've talked a lot about data. I am big on data. But I do think if you have the right product coupled with the right data, then the output will be largely successful.
All right, great. So Ansela, thanks a lot for being on the podcast. Unfortunately, that's the entire time. But I would be glad to have you back. And I think a few things I think would resonate to someone listening is just around digital lending. What's the space also for digital lending? There's always a lot of myth and misconception around the pricing. We've seen the regulator, of course, come in, and that has helped provide some sort of rules to the game in a game that didn't have any rules. Anything went, it was a free hit. So I think today was a conversation around the Money Match report, but I would be glad to have you back around what's happening in the digital space, and a lot of most people listening now would be consumers of your product. So it's always good to consider having you back on the podcast. But for now, much appreciated to have you.
Thank you so much, Kaf. I would love to have that conversation, and we can even make it broader into personal finance as a whole. But we think of ourselves as champions of the customer. So any conversation around the industry or personal finance, we're happy to engage.
Great. Yep. And that has been Stella Mombi, General Manager for Tala Kenya. And that has been another episode of Make Money the Podcast. Catch you on the next one. Goodbye.